blood flow. Okay, so start with what thing? Let's say there's an organism. The organism is basically having various organ systems. Okay, the organ systems are then made up of various organs. Organs are made up from tissue, and tissue are ultimately going to made from the cells. Okay, so this is what the basic organization looks like. Okay, now what is the important concept here? Just see, let's take a example here is basically I'll take heart. Okay, so heart give aorta. Okay, and this aorta then give arteries. The arteries will supply all the organs. So all organs are supplied by which vessels? By the arteries. Arteries then branch off and give multiple other branches, and finally arterioles. Okay, so these arterioles are at what level? Tissue level, and they finally give the capillaries. Okay, and these capillaries are basically having two-way connection. They supply the organs also, and they bring the stuff from the organs. So now the cell is the unit of life. So what is the vessel which is supplying the cells? The capillary, and they are for exchange. So that is why you are doing actually both directional flow. So good things like the glucose, nourishment, raw material, they go from capillary to cell, and all the metabolic waste, they go from cells to capillary. This is a very basic description of the blood flow arrangement as per the organization of body. Okay, but do you have to carry the deoxy and the blood back also? So that is why the circuit now move like this. The capillaries combine to make venules. Venules then make veins. Veins then end up in heart. How? Via vena cava, superior and inferior. Ultimately it goes to the heart. So this is the simple concept. Aorta, arteries, arterioles, capillary, venules, veins, vena cava, and the heart. This is what the circulation is always looking like. Okay, so let's start with the cells now. A cell is the unit of life, and everything revolves around how it is functioning and maintaining its own functions. So first is the cell. Okay, it contains basically, it is enclosed by cell membrane, CM. Okay, and cell organelles including the nucleus, etc. Okay, and cell organelles. Okay, so they are the basic stuff. Okay, so start with the cell membrane. Okay, so first is cell membrane is 7.5 nanometer thick. This was the question asked. 7.5 nanometer is the thickness. Next question, what is the best model to describe? Best model is Singer-Nicholson fluid mosaic model. So Singer's fluid mosaic model. Okay, so that is what the preferred model we describe. Okay, Singer's fluid mosaic model. Okay, now let's see the composition. Of cell membrane. Okay, so it is basically made up from lipids and proteins. Lipids and proteins. Okay, so what is more in the cell membrane, lipids or proteins? The proteins are more. Some people think it is the lipid. No, proteins 55 to 60%, and lipids are 40 to 45%. Okay, so lipids are less, proteins are more. Okay, now let's see what are the main lipids. Okay, so main lipids are basically phospholipids, along with we have cholesterol, glycolipids, etc. But question asked is what is not present? No triglycerides. So what lipid is missing in the cell membrane? Triglycerides are missing in the cell membrane. Okay, fine. Now let's discuss the phospholipids. The phospholipids basically they are the most abundant, and they are the most abundant lipid in cell membrane. Okay. Second, they are polar, they are polar molecules. Okay. What does mean by polar? They have two ends. Okay. One is the head end and other is the tail end. Okay. So two ends are head and the tail. Okay. Now the head end is made from phosphate group. Okay, and tail is made from the lipid chain. So lipid chain is creating the tail. Okay. Now the important thing to see here is head, which is having a phosphate group, is a charged body. Okay, and you know charges are always attracted or dissolve better in water. Why? Because water itself is a polar solvent. Actually water is not H2O, it is actually H plus, there is plus end, and OH minus minus. So say water is a polar solvent, and if water is a polar solvent, what it can do? It can dissolve what very easily? It can dissolve the ions very easily. So this end become water loving or hydrophilic. So remember charge ends, that is the phosphate group end, would be hydrophilic head, and the tail ends are hydrophobic. So one thing is the head is hydrophobic and the head is hydrophilic, and the tail is hydrophobic in nature. Okay. Now what is the condition or funda here? Okay, the tail, which is which part? The hydrophobic part, is having the following property. First is it will be repelled by the water. Okay, but problem is where is water present? Inside the cell, outside cell, or both? Both ICF and ECF. So the solution to this problem is you arrange them as a bi-layered entity. So that is why arrange as bilayer. So what is the effect of arranging as a bilayer? Both the head ends will face what? The outer, you can say, surfaces. So now the tail ends get hidden between the water loving head ends, and that is why both ICF and ECF fluid is now in contact with the head ends. Okay. So let me show it. See, let us say this is I am making a cell membrane. Okay. Now what happens? So I am just drawing the remaining as dotted lines because tough to make the entire membrane. Okay. So now you can see the ICF fluid and the ECF fluid will be in interaction with what? With the yes, hydrophilic head ends. Okay. So that's where the problem is solved. And what is sandwich between them? The water heating tail end. So that is why they are no longer in contact with the water in ICF or ECF. Okay. Now next point is they also contain what thing? The proteins. So let me show the proteins. So some proteins are attached here, some are attached here, and some go whole way through the membrane like this. So these proteins which are going from one end to other end, they are given what name? So they are given the name of integral proteins. Okay, because they are integrated from one end to other end of the phospholipid layer, and these ones which are on the inner outer, they are called as a peripheral protein. So these are called as a peripheral proteins. Okay. Next is, what are the functions of the lipids and proteins in the cell membrane are. So let us see the function of lipids and the proteins. Okay. So right, functions of lipid in cell membrane. Okay. So first is, they keep everything together and create a very, you can say, stable membrane. So they provide structural integrity. So the first property, they keep stuff together and create and have something called as structural integrity. Then they are also very flexible, so that's why membranes can easily bend, or they can stretch or even divide when the cell is dividing in mitosis, meiosis. So they provide flexibility and fluidity. Okay. So that's why you can say it's a sea of lipids which is very fluid, just like a, you can say, oil layer with insertion. Mosaic means insertion at random places, the proteins. So proteins are inserted between the phospholipid molecules. So called as which model? Fluid mosaic model. The last property from physiology point of view is solubility. Now let us focus on the concept of solubility. Right, lipid soluble substances can easily cross cell membrane. Okay. So what substances can easily cross the cell membrane? Lipid soluble substances. Example, most gases. Example, gases. So example is gases like O2, CO2, ammonia, carbon monoxide, etc. So they all are able to cross. Why? Because first, they are polar or non-polar. They are not charged, they are non-polar, so that's why they are mainly lipid soluble. Polar are basically water soluble because of again charge. Okay. Then the fatty acids, cholesterol, okay, it can easily go in and out of the membrane. Then we have what thing? We also have, right, vitamin A, D, E, K. So which vitamins? A, D, E, K. Okay. And also we have thyroid and steroid hormones. Etc. we can put. So all these are lipid soluble substances and they can cross the membrane without any problem whatsoever. Is it clear? So what they can do? Cross the membrane very easily. Okay. But is everything lipid soluble? No, there are lots of substances which are water soluble also. So that is why they are not able to cross the membrane easily. So that is why what do we require? We require substances which are what soluble? Yes, water soluble, crossing, require what? Proteins. So right, proteins of cell membrane help in transport and action of, so proteins of cell membrane help in transport and action of what thing? Action of water soluble substances across cell membrane. Okay. So what is helping in the movement of water soluble substances? Yes, it is basically helped by the proteins. So proteins help in moving what substances? Water soluble substances. So lipid soluble are not a problem, they can directly go through the membrane, but water soluble require some help. So who is providing the help? The proteins are providing the help. Okay. Now write down next concept. The next concept we see is as follows. Okay, right. First, so ions. So ions are having what property? Like sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride, etc. So there are what things? They are basically ions. Okay, sodium, potassium, calcium. Okay. Now as you know, ions are charged particle, so they are dissolving only and only in what thing? Yes, in a polar solvent like the water. I told you water is plus minus, so that's why they can easily dissolve in water. So they are water soluble. So can't cross lipid cell membrane. So they are not able to cross the lipid part of cell membrane. Okay, so they are unable to cross the lipid part of the cell membrane. So that is why what they do. So that is why they use proteins as. So they use the proteins as either ion channels or as pumps. Okay, so they use the proteins as either ion channels or as pumps. Okay, now ion channels are basically made from tunnel proteins. So MCQ, what proteins? Tunnel proteins. And pumps are basically having what? Pumps. The pumps are basically use ATP. That's the main property. They use ATP. Okay, so I'll discuss them later in active passive transport. So pumps use the ATP, and ion channels are basically what? They are tunnel proteins. So they are basically tunnel proteins. Okay, let me give an example. Let's say there's a cell and sodium ion wants to come inside. So it's not possible. So that is why we create a small tunnel like structure which can now allow the movement of sodium across this. Yes or no? So now the sodium can easily enter. So what is this structure called as? This is called as a sodium channel. Okay, so that is how the sodium is able to cross the cell membrane with the help of opening called as a sodium channel. Okay, next is we see number 2, water use aquaporins, which are water channels. Water channels. Now some of you will say, sir, channels were used for ions, why are we using the word channels for water? The answer is, again I am telling you, it's very interesting. Water is actually going not as H2O, it actually break into OH minus and H plus. So that's why technically the water also goes in ionic form. So that is why what the word use channel. So channels are basically reserved for what? You will never hear the word sodium channel is there, but not glucose channel, urea channel. Channels are basically the term used for charged particles. Okay. Number 3, solutes. Okay, so what is the funda about the solutes? They are water soluble stuff. Example, we have sugars, amino acids, etc. Now again, can they cross the membrane? No, because they are water soluble. So that's why they use what? They use proteins as carriers or transporters. Example, glute. Okay, so example for this is what thing? It is the glute. Okay, so what is glute? It is glucose transporter. So what is glute? It's a glucose transporter. It helps in transport of water soluble glucose inside the cell. So called as the glute, that is glucose transporter. Okay. Next is what else do we see or have here is, okay. So I'll discuss the types of glute later on when I discuss the endocrine, etc. Right. Water soluble hormones Example, polypeptides. Polypeptides, okay. So water soluble hormones, example polypeptides like insulin, which contain 51 amino acids. So it contains 51 amino acids. Which substance? The yes, polypeptides. Now first is a polypeptide is water soluble because it contain amino acids. Second is it is very big in size. So double problem, not only it is water soluble but also big in size. So glucose can enter via opening called glut, but problem is it's so big it cannot enter the membrane easily. So that is why they are not only water soluble but big size and water soluble. So that is why the solution to this problem is they don't enter the cell like this, they basically are going to do what? So they act from outside. So they act from outside by cell surface receptor. Okay. So they will be acting from the outside using what thing? The cell surface receptors. Okay. So they use the cell surface receptors. Okay. So I'll give example. Let's say the cell, this is the nucleus, and now let's say this thyroid hormone T3, T4. So they can cross the membrane and they act inside. So they can cross the membrane and act inside the cell. Whereas a hormone like let's say insulin and the binding site of insulin. So let's say this is insulin. Now it cannot enter the cell. So that is why it binds to the receptor. Okay. So this receptor is going to bind here, and then the action would be performed. So who will do the action? Yes, the receptor act inside. So in this case what will act inside? Not the hormone, hormone remain outside, but what act inside? The receptor will act inside. So that is why if problem occur, see in case of thyroid only one problem, thyroid is there or not there. If not there, there is hypothyroidism, too much there, hyperthyroidism. In case of insulin there are two problems. If insulin is not there, then also you will not get the action, diabetes is there, and if receptor is defective, then also the action is not there. That is why there are two primary types of diabetes. Type 1 that is insulin dependent, and when the receptors are not working properly, it is type 2 which is not dependent on insulin but rather the receptors are called as non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus or type 2. Okay. So is it clear now? Next is number 5, the proteins of cell membrane. Cell membrane also act as antigens. Example, MHCs. Example is MHC. So what is the example? MHC. So let me give example. First is we all know that our DNAs are different. So the DNAs are going to make transcription, mRNA, and then translation to proteins. And since the genes which are making like MHCs are highly variable, so my DNA is different from your DNA. So that's why my MHC will be very different from your MHC. So that's why if you give your organ to me or I give my organ donated to you, what happens? The MHCs will not match and cause a rejection of the organ. So that's why what is the best antigen? They are the proteins, because what? They are having very high variations. Okay. So what are the main protein antigens? Protein, lipid or carbs? The answer is proteins are the main antigens. Okay. Example is major histocompatibility complex proteins. Okay. So what is the summary? What are the 5 functions the proteins are performing? They allow the ions by acting as channel or pump. Then they allow the water by acting as water channels. Then they allow the solutes by acting as carrier and transporters. Then they help in action of water soluble substance like the hormones, neurotransmitters by acting as what? The cell surface receptors. And also they can act as antigens. What are they called as? Major histocompatibility complex. Okay, so major histocompatibility complex. Okay. Next is we have a look at the body fluids. So topic is body fluids. Okay. So what is the funda about body fluids? First, 60 to 70% of body weight is water. Okay. So it is water. What is the preferred value? 60 is not the right but preferred for calculation. So it is the preferred value for most calculations. Okay. So what is the value we prefer for calculations? 60% is the preferred value for all calculations. Okay. Now next question, this water is less in females and obese. Okay. So this water is less in females and the obese. Why? The reason is simple, because in females and obese there is more body fat. Fat and water don't mix up, so that's why as the fat quantity increase, the water level decrease. Why? Due to more body fat. So the reason, more body fat. Okay. Next is the body water. What is it called as, Saram? So body water is called as TBW, that is total body water. Okay. So whatever water is there in the body in the form of the body weight, it is called as total body water or TBW. Okay. So what is this total body water divided into? So let's start. Let's say your body weight is how much? Is, let's say, 60 kg. Okay. So 60 kg person will have how much total body water if you take 60%, as I told you? Yes, 36 liter. So out of all the body weight, 36 is the total body water. So what is the total body water? 36 is the total body water. Is it clear? Now this total body water is divided into how many parts? 2 parts, ICF and ECF. Okay. ICF is 2/3, ECF is 1/3. Okay. So ICF is 2/3 and ECF is what value? 1/3 value. So ICF is 2/3, ECF is 1/3. Okay. So if you convert it, how much it become? So first, if the total body water is 36, let's divide into 3 parts. So divide by 3, you get 12, 12 and 12. So 12 becomes ECF and 24 becomes ICF. Okay. So how much is ECF, ICF? 2/3 and 1/3. Okay. So how much would be the ECF? It is around 12 liter. And how much is ICF? 24. Okay. 24 liters. Okay. 24 liters. Clear? Next question. Okay. So this 2/3 is there. Okay. So can I say ICF is twice ECF? Yes. So we can say roughly ICF is double the amount of the ECF. Okay. Now what segregate or separate ICF from the ECF? Right on. So they are separated by cell membrane, CM. What is CM? Cell membrane segregates ICF from the ECF. Okay. Fine. So ICF from ECF. What is the main point of differentiation? It is the, yes, cell membrane. Okay. What is the ICF? All fluid inside cells. Now what is ECF? ECF. ECF is outside the cell. Okay. It is divided in 2 parts, plasma and interstitial fluid. Okay, so plasma and interstitial fluid. Okay, so plasma and interstitial fluid. Plasma is how much? It is 25%. Interstitial is 75%. Okay, so let's convert. You divide it by 4, so you get 3, 3, 3, 3. So how much will be plasma? 3 liters. Interstitial would be 9 liters. So 3 liters is interstitial, sorry, 3 is plasma and 9 is the interstitial fluid. Is it clear? So interstitial fluid. Okay. Now what is the differentiation? Vessel. So what is plasma? It is a fluid inside vessels. Fluid inside vessels or blood minus cells. Okay, so blood minus cells. Okay, so blood minus cells is plasma. Okay, interstitial fluid on the other hand is what value? It is basically fluid between the cells, or the cells called as tissue, collection of cells is tissue, and vessels. Okay, so it is fluid between cells, that is the tissue, and the vessels. Okay, and the vessels. Okay, so what is the fluid which is present located between various tissues and the vessels? Yes, it is called as the interstitial fluid. Okay, done. Now next point is, it is also called as tissue fluid. Why? Because surround the tissue, so called as the tissue fluid, and help form lymph. Help form lymph. Okay, so what is the lymph? Formed from interstitial fluid. So that is the property of this, is formed from the interstitial this. Okay,